The unanswered questions. As we wrap up this examination of the situation facing Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, we're left with far more questions than answers. Are they actually planning legal action against their mother? We don't know. Do tapes involving them exist? Almost certainly not, based on lack of credible reporting. Is Sarah Ferguson asking them for money and help with damage control? Possibly, but unverified. Are they emotionally devastated by these revelations? Almost certainly yes, but that's based on reasonable inference rather than direct confirmation. What we do know for certain is that the Epstein files revealed a pattern of behavior by Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew that was, at minimum, profoundly poor judgment, and at worst, something far more sinister. We know that Beatrice and Eugenie were brought into Epstein's orbit by their parents. We know that they were mentioned in correspondence with him. We know that their privacy was violated and their images were shared with a convicted sex offender. We know that the sisters are now dealing with the public consequences of choices their parents made. We know they spent Christmas with the king, suggesting they're aligning with the institutional royal family rather than their parents. We know they haven't made public statements, suggesting they're trying to handle this with dignity and privacy. What we don't know is how this will ultimately resolve. Will there be legal action? Will there be a public reckoning? Will Sarah Ferguson ever acknowledge the harm her choices caused? Will Andrew, will Beatrice and Eugenie eventually speak publicly about their experiences? Will their relationship with their parents survive this, or is it irreparably damaged? Welcome to the channel, the documented Epstein files, what we know for certain. Let's start with what is absolutely documented and verifiable. When the Department of Justice released over 3 million pages of Epstein-related documents in early 2026, the York family's connections to Jeffrey Epstein were laid bare in ways that were previously only suspected or alleged. These weren't rumors or tabloid speculation. These were actual emails, correspondence, and records that showed a pattern of continued contact between Sarah Ferguson, Prince Andrew, and Jeffrey Epstein even after his 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor. The documents showed Sarah Ferguson flying to Palm Beach to meet Epstein just 5 days after he was released from prison, having served 13 months of an 18-month sentence. This is documented fact. What's also documented is that this meeting occurred in 2009 and that Beatrice and Eugenie, who were approximately 20 and 19 years old at that time, were reportedly with her. These aren't wild allegations, these come from the actual released files. The question that haunts this entire story is, why? Why would any mother consider taking her daughters, even adult daughters, to meet a man who had just been released from prison for crimes involving young women? What possible justification could there be? And more importantly, what were Beatrice and Eugenie told about this meeting? Did they know the full extent of Epstein's crimes at that time? Did they understand who they were meeting? Or were they kept in the dark by parents who had their own complicated relationship with this man? The Christmas photo emails documented evidence. Another verifiable fact from the released documents: Andrew Mountbatten Windsor emailed photos of his daughters to Jeffrey Epstein. Multiple emails from 2010 and 2011 show Andrew sending Epstein photographs of Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie engaged in normal activities like bike riding and climbing. These are actual emails that exist in the court record. This isn't speculation. This is documented behavior that raises profound questions about judgment, about boundaries, about what Andrew thought his relationship with Epstein was or should be. Think about this from Beatrice and Eugenie's perspective. Imagine being in your 20s trying to build your own lives, establish your own identities separate from your controversial parents. And then discovering years later that your father was sending photos of you to a convicted sex offender, not once, not twice. Multiple times over multiple years. How do you process that? How do you reconcile that with loving your father, with wanting to maintain a family relationship, with trying to move forward with your own lives? The emails also show Epstein routinely asking whether Sarah would be bringing the girls to various events or meetings. In one email from Sarah to Epstein, she apologizes that the girls were not around this weekend, writing, "Shows I don't crack the whip when I'm not in the country." Actually, Eugenie was in France and Beatrice was out with Dave. The casual tone is jarring. This isn't correspondence between distant acquaintances. This is familiar, friendly communication between people who are clearly in regular contact. The birthday party photo, a troubling timeline. There's a photograph that has received significant attention. It was taken at Windsor Castle on July 15, 2006, at Princess Beatrice's Victorian-themed 18th birthday party, and Jeffrey Epstein is in that photograph. Now here's where the timeline becomes particularly troubling. Princess Beatrice's actual birthday is in early August, not mid-July. So on July 15, 2006, when this party was held and this photo was taken, Beatrice was still 17 years old. How could Andrew and Sarah be so bold as to invite Epstein to their daughter's birthday celebration, knowing that his crimes were against the same age demographic that both of their daughters fell into? This is the question that haunts many people looking at this situation. It suggests either a profound lack of judgment about who Epstein was and what he'd done, or it suggests something even more disturbing, that they simply didn't care, that the benefits of maintaining the relationship with Epstein outweighed the risks of having him around their teenage daughters. Sarah's emails. Just marry me. The emails from Sarah Ferguson to Jeffrey Epstein that have been released are frankly shocking in their tone and content. An email dated January 30, 2010 reads, "You are a legend. I really don't have the words to describe my love, gratitude for your generosity and kindness. I am at your service. Just marry me." This isn't professional correspondence. This isn't the kind of email you send to a business acquaintance. This is intimate, desperate, deeply personal communication. Sarah Ferguson, a woman who was once the Duchess of York, married to the Queen's son, is begging a convicted sex offender to marry her. The desperation is palpable. The need for financial security, for social status, for whatever Epstein represented to her was apparently so overwhelming that she was willing to write these words, to express these sentiments to a man whose crimes were documented and undeniable. There's another email from July 13, 2009, where Sarah reaches out to Epstein for bankruptcy advice. "Jeffrey, you are a true friend," she writes. She then asks for his advice on an offer from John Caldwell, the British billionaire founder of Phones for You, who apparently offered to give her £10 million in exchange for 50% of her net profits for life. Epstein's reply, according to the documents, have him put the deal in writing. This shows Epstein acting as Sarah's financial advisor, someone she trusted with major life decisions, someone she leaned on for guidance about her financial future. The business connection, Target and beyond. According to some reports, Sarah Ferguson was introduced to Target, the American retail giant, by Jeffrey Epstein. Her Sarah Ferguson product line that Target agreed to carry was allegedly an Epstein introduction. This suggests that Epstein wasn't just a social connection or occasional financial benefactor. He was actively involved in facilitating Sarah's business ventures, opening doors for her, using his connections to help her generate income. This creates a pattern that's deeply disturbing. Every time Sarah needed something, whether it was bankruptcy advice, business connections, or apparently just emotional support and validation, she turned to Jeffrey Epstein, a man who had been convicted of crimes against young women. A man whose predatory behavior was documented, and she not only maintained that relationship herself but brought her daughters into his orbit. The house assistant email, rock bottom. At some point, according to the released documents, Sarah Ferguson asked Epstein if she could work as his house assistant. Let that sink in for a moment. A former duchess, a woman who had been married to the Queen's son, asking a convicted sex offender if she could work for him as domestic staff. The level of financial desperation, the complete erosion of dignity and self-worth, the willingness to accept literally any role in Epstein's world if it meant financial stability, it's almost painful to contemplate. This email, more than perhaps any other, reveals the depth of Sarah Ferguson's crisis. Not just financial crisis, though that was real and severe, but a crisis of identity, of self-respect, of judgment. When you're willing to ask a man who spent time in prison for soliciting minors if you can clean his house for money, you have reached a breaking point that most people cannot fathom. The SHAGGING weekend comment, betrayal of privacy. One of the most disturbing details that has emerged from the documents is an alleged reference by Sarah to Eugenie being away on a shagging weekend. Imagine finding out that your mother told anyone about your private life in those terms. Now imagine that the person she told was Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender. The betrayal of privacy, the lack of maternal protection, the casual nature of discussing your daughter's sex life with this particular individual, it's almost incomprehensible. This single detail, if accurate, encapsulates so much of what went wrong in the York family dynamic. There were no boundaries, there was no protection. Sarah treated Epstein as a confidant, as someone she could gossip with about her daughters' private lives, and in doing so, she exposed them to someone who had demonstrated through his criminal conviction that he viewed young women as objects for his own gratification. Beatrice and Eugenie, the sisters' perspective. According to various reports, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie are mentioned hundreds of times in the Epstein files because of their mother. That's not an exaggeration for effect. That's reportedly the reality. Hundreds of references. Hundreds of times their names came up in correspondence, in emails, in discussions between their parents and a convicted sex offender. How do you process that? How do you wake up every day knowing that your childhood, your teenage years, your early 20s were apparently topics of conversation with Jeffrey Epstein? Russell Myers, the royal editor of Britain's The Mirror newspaper who has covered the Windsor family for the past decade, has spoken about how incredibly distressing this must be for both young women to see themselves mentioned so freely by their parents in correspondence with a convicted offender. There's a great deal of sympathy for them, but as Myers also notes, the public has questions about their involvement as well. The questions remain both inside the palace and publicly. Could Beatrice and Eugenie have raised concerns to their parents or more widely, considering how close they were brought into Epstein's world even after he was convicted? The Accusations of being sold, examining the claims. Now we come to some of the more explosive and harder to verify claims that have appeared in various outlets. According to reporting that has been cited by multiple tabloid sources, there are allegations that Sarah Ferguson essentially sold her daughters to Epstein for social and financial gain. The language is inflammatory and disturbing. What does it actually mean? If we interpret this charitably, what's being alleged is that Sarah used her daughters as social currency. That she brought them to events with Epstein, encouraged their presence in his world, facilitated their interaction with him, all to maintain her own relationship with a wealthy and well-connected man who could help her financially. She paraded Epstein around as the friendly family uncle, according to these reports. She included him in their birthday celebrations. She asked if he wanted her daughters to say hello to his associates. The less charitable interpretation, the one that some outlets have leaned into, is that there was something more calculated, more mercenary about it, that Sarah knew Epstein's preferences and deliberately placed her daughters in his proximity. This is an extraordinarily serious allegation. It suggests not just poor judgment but active facilitation of potential harm, and it's important to state clearly, there is no verified evidence that Sarah Ferguson intended harm to her daughters or knowingly placed them in danger. The lawsuit Allegations, separating fact from speculation. Several tabloid outlets have reported that Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie are planning to take legal action against their mother. Some reports claim they're planning to sue Sarah Ferguson for selling them to Epstein. Other reports suggest they're considering legal action related to how they've been portrayed in the media as a result of their parents' associations. And then there are reports that claim the existence of tapes involving the princesses that Epstein allegedly made. Let's be very clear about what we can and cannot verify here. As of the recording of this content, there is no verified mainstream news reporting from sources like the BBC, Reuters, Associated Press, or The Times confirming that Beatrice and Eugenie have filed or are planning to file a lawsuit against their mother. These allegations appear primarily in tabloid publications like Woman magazine and Star magazine, which are not considered reliable sources for breaking news about active legal proceedings. The claim about tapes is even more troubling and even less verified. If such evidence existed and was part of the legal case against Epstein or others in his network, it would have been referenced in court documents or official proceedings. The casual way this explosive claim is mentioned in some tabloid reports without sourcing or verification suggests it may be speculation or sensationalism rather than fact. That said, the absence of mainstream news confirmation doesn't mean these allegations are false. It means they're unverified. Legal proceedings, particularly those involving prominent people and sensitive matters, often remain private until they reach a certain stage. It's entirely possible that Beatrice and Eugenie are consulting with lawyers, considering their options, having difficult conversations with their mother without any of that becoming public knowledge. The crisis talks, what we know about the sisters' response. According to the Mirror and other outlets, Beatrice and Eugenie have been having what's been described as full-blown crisis talks. These reportedly took place over a weekend in what was described as a last-ditch effort to navigate the predicament they found themselves in. What does that actually mean? What are crisis talks in this context? It likely means the sisters are working with advisors, possibly legal counsel, possibly PR professionals, possibly trusted friends and family, to figure out how to handle the public fallout from their parents' decisions. How do you protect your own reputations when your mother's emails to a sex offender are being published in newspapers? How do you maintain your careers, your charitable work, your social standing, when your father's judgment is being questioned daily? How do you set boundaries with parents you presumably still love, while also protecting yourself from the consequences of their choices? The sisters reportedly spent Christmas with the king and the rest of the Windsor clan at Sandringham. This is significant because it suggests they're aligning themselves with the main branch of the royal family rather than their parents. They're choosing the institution over the individuals who brought them into this mess. That's both a smart strategic move and probably an emotionally devastating one. Imagine having to choose between your parents and your future, between family loyalty and self-preservation. The financial desperation angle, Sarah's alleged DMANDS. According to Star magazine, which we must note is a tabloid source, Sarah Ferguson is allegedly desperate for cash and wants Beatrice and Eugenie to loan her money. Even worse, according to these same reports, she wants them to help with damage control, reaching out to people within the firm, the royal family, and within their wider social circle to rehabilitate her reputation. If these reports are accurate, and that's a significant if, it reveals a profound lack of self-awareness on Sarah's part. Your daughters are dealing with the fallout from your decisions, from your choices to maintain a relationship with a convicted sex offender, from your emails that have now been made public. And in the midst of their crisis, you're asking them for money and asking them to fix your reputation. The dynamic would be deeply unhealthy if true, but we need to be careful here. These reports come from tabloid sources. We don't have independent verification. It's possible that Sarah is being portrayed unfairly, that these claims are exaggerated or fabricated to sell magazines. It's also possible that there's truth to them. The reality is probably somewhere in between. Sarah Ferguson has a well-documented history of financial mismanagement and debt. It would not be surprising if she's in financial difficulty again. Whether she's specifically asking her daughters for money and help, we simply cannot verify. Sarah's spokesperson's previous DNIALS. What makes all of this particularly galling for Beatrice and Eugenie is that last year, Sarah Ferguson's spokesperson issued a statement claiming she had severed ties with Epstein as soon as she became aware of the extent of the allegations against him. That statement is now revealed to be demonstrably false. The emails show continued contact well after Epstein's conviction. They show Sarah meeting with him days after his prison release. They show ongoing financial entanglement and emotional dependence. So not only are Beatrice and Eugenie dealing with the reality of their mother's choices, they're also dealing with the fact that she publicly lied about those choices. She denied the extent of the relationship. She claimed moral high ground she didn't possess. And now her daughters are left to deal with the consequences of both the original actions and the subsequent cover-up. Sarah even attacked Virginia Giuffa during an interview after Giuffa brought allegations concerning Andrew. When asked about allegations that Giuffa was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew on several occasions when she was underage, Sarah's response was emphatic. "Knowing him as I know him, and he's one of the greatest men I've ever met in my life and my best friend and great father to my children, I just thought I don't understand in this day and age how people can make salacious lies up." This is defamation of character of a person that is the opposite to how he's being portrayed. With the benefit of hindsight and the release of the Epstein files, Sarah's vigorous defense of Andrew looks even worse. She wasn't just defending her ex-husband. She was attacking his accusers while maintaining her own relationship with the man at the center of it all. That's a betrayal not just of the women who suffered abuse, but of her own daughters who are now collateral damage in this entire scandal. The question of accountability at the heart of all of this is a question of accountability. Should Sarah Ferguson be held accountable for her choices? Legally, morally, personally, and if so, by whom and in what form? The reports of potential legal action by Beatrice and Eugenie against their mother raise this question in its most dramatic form. Can daughters sue their mother for exposing them to a dangerous individual, for using them as social currency, for betraying their privacy and safety? From a legal standpoint, it would be an extraordinarily difficult case to make. What damages could they claim? What harm could they prove that directly resulted from Sarah's actions? The exposure to Epstein occurred when they were adults, even if barely. They would need to demonstrate that Sarah's actions caused them specific, quantifiable harm. That's a high bar to clear legally, even if the moral case seems obvious to outside observers. But perhaps the legal case isn't the point. Perhaps what Beatrice and Eugenie are considering, if these reports have any truth to them, is using the threat of legal action to force some kind of acknowledgement from their mother, an admission of wrongdoing. An apology, some form of accountability that has been lacking, because from everything we know, Sarah Ferguson has never publicly apologized to her daughters for the situation she put them in. The wellness clinic IPORTS, Sarah's whereabouts according to various media reports, Sarah Ferguson has been staying at a $24,000 per day wellness clinic since the most recent batch of Epstein files was released. If accurate, this raises its own set of questions. First, where is she getting $24,000 per day for a wellness clinic when she's supposedly desperate for cash? Second, is this a genuine mental health retreat, or is it a strategic disappearance to avoid media scrutiny? The timing is certainly convenient. The files drop, revealing the extent of her relationship with Epstein in her own words. The public outcry is immediate and intense. And Sarah Ferguson disappears to a luxury wellness facility. It looks like avoidance. It looks like someone who doesn't want to face the consequences of their actions, hiding behind a veneer of self-care. But we should also acknowledge the possibility that Sarah Ferguson is genuinely struggling with her mental health in the wake of these revelations. Having your private emails published for the world to see, having your financial desperation and emotional neediness exposed, having your relationship with your daughters potentially destroyed, these are genuinely traumatic experiences, even if they're consequences of your own choices. People can be both culpable for their actions and suffering from the fallout of those actions simultaneously. The palace's dilemma, supporting Beatrice and Eugenie. The question posed at the end of some of these reports is crucial. Is the crown going to support Beatrice and Eugenie, or is it going to leave them alone in their struggle? This gets at a fundamental tension within the royal family right now. Beatrice and Eugenie are not working royals. They don't receive public funding. They're not part of the slimmed-down monarchy that King Charles has envisioned, but they are the king's nieces. They are members of the family. They are, by all accounts, well-liked and respected individuals who have done nothing wrong. The palace is in a difficult position. If they provide too much visible support to Beatrice and Eugenie, it draws more attention to the Andrew and Sarah scandal. It keeps the story alive in news cycles. It potentially makes the entire royal family look complicit in the original poor decisions. But if they don't support them, if they leave these two young women to navigate this nightmare on their own, it makes the palace look cold, calculating, willing to sacrifice family members to protect the institution. So far, the approach seems to be quiet support. Beatrice and Eugenie were included in Christmas at Sandringham with the king. That's a signal of support without making a public statement. They're being kept within the family fold while their parents are increasingly isolated. It's a careful balancing act, but it might be the best approach available given the circumstances. The broader IMPLICATIONS, children of scandal. The situation facing Beatrice and Eugenie raises broader questions about what we expect of children of scandalous parents. How much responsibility do they bear for their parents' choices? How much grace should they be extended? At what point does their silence or their continued relationship with their parents become complicity? These are not easy questions. Beatrice and Eugenie were brought into Epstein's orbit by their parents. They met him at their parents' urging. They were in photographs with him at events their parents organized. But they were also young, relatively sheltered, and presumably trusting of their parents' judgment. The question that Russell Myers raised about whether they could have or should have raised concerns is legitimate but also perhaps unfair. How do you question your parents' judgment about a family friend, even one with a criminal history, when your parents are presenting everything as normal? The sisters have chosen, wisely, not to make public statements. They've maintained their dignity and privacy in the face of extraordinary public scrutiny. They've continued with their charitable work and their personal lives as much as possible under the circumstances. And if the reports are accurate that they're having crisis talks and considering their legal options, they're taking the situation seriously without turning it into a media circus. The speculation about TAPES, addressing the unverified. The claim that has appeared in some outlets about Epstein having made tapes involving Beatrice and Eugenie is perhaps the most disturbing and also the least verified allegation in this entire story. This claim appears to originate from tabloid sources without any corroboration from law enforcement, court documents, or reliable investigative journalism. If such evidence existed, it would be part of the federal case against Epstein and anyone involved in his network. It would have been referenced in court proceedings. The idea that this evidence exists but has somehow only been revealed through tabloid reporting and not through official legal channels strains credulity. This appears to be speculation at best or clickbait sensationalism designed to generate traffic at worst. That said, we should acknowledge that not all evidence in the Epstein case has been made public. There may be sealed documents, ongoing investigations, evidence that's being held for potential future prosecutions. It's theoretically possible that evidence exists that hasn't been publicly disclosed. But making that claim without solid sourcing is irresponsible journalism. And repeating that claim without significant caveats about verification is potentially harmful to Beatrice and Eugenie, who are already dealing with enough public scrutiny. What does accountability look like? If we step back from the specific allegations and unverified claims, what does accountability actually look like in this situation? Sarah Ferguson made choices over many years. She maintained a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after his conviction. She brought her daughters into that relationship. She wrote emails that revealed financial desperation and emotional dependence on a convicted sex offender. She defended Andrew against his accusers while maintaining her connection to Epstein. These are all documented facts. What would accountability mean? A public apology to her daughters. A frank acknowledgement of the choices she made and the harm they caused. Financial restitution if her actions have cost them professionally or personally. Cooperation with any investigations into Epstein's network. Withdrawal from public life. There are many possible forms accountability could take, and so far we've seen none of them from Sarah Ferguson. Instead, we've seen disappearance, whether to a wellness clinic or elsewhere. We've seen silence from her representatives. We've seen no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no expression of regret for how her choices affected her daughters. And perhaps that's what's driving Beatrice and Eugenie to consider legal action if those reports are accurate. When someone won't voluntarily accept accountability, sometimes the only option is to force it through legal means. The emotional toll, processing parental betrayal. Beyond the legal questions, beyond the public relations nightmare, beyond the financial implications, there's the simple human reality of what Beatrice and Eugenie are going through emotionally. They're processing a profound betrayal by both of their parents. Their father sent photos of them to Epstein. Their mother discussed their private lives with him. Both parents maintained this relationship after Epstein's conviction, after his crimes were known, after any reasonable person would have severed all contact. How do you process that? How do you maintain a relationship with parents who demonstrated such catastrophically poor judgment? How do you trust them ever again? How do you allow them around your own children if you have them? These are not abstract questions for Beatrice and Eugenie. These are lived realities they're navigating every single day. The reports of them being emotionally broken by this, if accurate, are entirely understandable. Who wouldn't be broken by discovering the extent of their parents' relationship with someone like Epstein? Who wouldn't struggle with the knowledge that they were discussed, photographed, and apparently used as social currency by the people who were supposed to protect them above all else? The social circle IMPLICATIONS. One aspect that hasn't received as much attention but is probably significant for Beatrice and Eugenie is the impact this has on their social circles. They move in elite British society. They have friends in aristocratic families, connections to wealthy individuals, relationships with people who value reputation and propriety above almost everything else. How do they navigate those relationships now? Are they being quietly dropped from invitation lists? Are longtime friends distancing themselves? Are potential professional opportunities disappearing because no one wants to be associated with the Epstein scandal, however tangentially? These are real consequences that Beatrice and Eugenie may be facing, consequences of their parents' choices that affect their own lives profoundly. According to some reports, Sarah Ferguson has been asking her daughters to help with damage control with various people within the firm and within their wider social circle. If true, this suggests Sarah understands that relationships have been damaged and is asking her daughters to repair them on her behalf. The audacity of that request, if accurate, is breathtaking. You damaged these relationships through your own choices. Now you want your daughters, who are dealing with their own fallout, to fix things for you. The institutional royal family's calculation. From the perspective of the institutional royal family, the Crown, Buckingham Palace, the calculation about Beatrice and Eugenie is probably coldly strategic. They're assessing what is the risk of supporting them versus the risk of abandoning them. What message does each approach send? What are the long-term implications? Supporting them sends a message that the royal family takes care of its own, even when things go wrong. It suggests compassion and family loyalty. But it also keeps the story alive and potentially makes the institution look like it's protecting people connected to the Epstein scandal. Abandoning them sends a message that the royal family has high standards and won't be associated with scandal. But it also looks cruel and suggests that family members are disposable when they become inconvenient. The approach they seem to have chosen, quiet inclusion without public statements, is probably the least bad option. Beatrice and Eugenie are being kept within the family fold. They're being included in family events. But there are no public statements of support that would generate headlines and keep the story in the news cycle. It's a pragmatic approach that tries to balance competing interests. The only thing we can say with certainty is that Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie have been placed in an impossible situation through no fault of their own. They're the collateral damage of their parents' choices. They're the next generation paying the price for the previous generation's catastrophically poor judgment. And they deserve far more sympathy and far less speculation than they've received from much of the media coverage of this story. As for accountability, that remains the central question. Sarah Ferguson has not been held accountable for her choices. Neither has Prince Andrew, beyond social exile and the loss of royal duties. Whether that accountability will come through legal channels, through public pressure, through family consequences, or not at all, remains to be seen. But Beatrice and Eugenie deserve to see their parents acknowledge what they did and the harm it caused. That much, at minimum, should not be too much to ask.